All right. Hello and welcome to the Great Wave Podcast. This is episode 3, and today my guest is Chizu Omori.
Hello, I'm Chizu.
No, it's so Chizu Omori is a Japanese American activist who has been in activism for many, many years, raising awareness for the Japanese American internment, and in the modern day, working a lot on solidarity between Black Americans and Japanese Americans. So, the first thing I do want to talk about is Chizu. You lived through the Japanese internment, is that correct?
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about life in the internment?
Sure. First of all, I have scholars and friends who would like to set the record straight, and that internment is really not legally what we underwent. Internment refers legally to something which is concerning non-citizens.
Mm,
Alien people, and so when
yeah.
people are interned, they're usually put into a Department of Justice camps. Now we had a number of those, because there were aliens among us, but we prefer like incarceration, or actually we're now referring to the camps as concentration camps because legally that term does apply to our situation. Um, I only mention this because so much in the past, our experience was kind of covered up by using euphemistic words that, they talked about relocation and things like that, which made it seem more benign. But anyway, so I'm taking more to calling them concentration camps because that seems closer to the real experience.
Yeah.
Anyway, I grew up in a farm community in Oceanside, California, and actually, to say grew up in one place, this is not true. Before the war, because Japanese were not allowed to own land or to lease land in California for longer than 3 years, it meant that people like my family, farmers, uh, could not stay in one place. So we had to move around. So in my childhood, I remember, several moves where we went to different places. The last place where we were is Oceanside, and our family was part of a family cooperative of Japanese farmers. And when I look back on it, it's kind of like, I guess they set it up kind of like a village structure. So we had this little community of maybe 20 families or more. Um, and we're farming in the same area. They were organized into an actual cooperative, and they built a schoolhouse so that we could go to Japanese school every day after American school. And, we did a lot of social activities among ourselves. So I kind of think of it as sort of a Japanese village idea transplanted to the US. On the other hand, there weren't very many of people of Japanese descent in our area. So when we went to the American white school, we were a distinct minority. There weren't very many of us. So, we didn't stand out particularly. There in Oceanside, it was more like the Mexican kids, and if there was any major discrimination, it was against the Mexican kids and not us. So I have no memory of being singled out or, um, had racist epithets thrown at me or anything. I do not remember anything like that, and so um, we were living dual culture lives, without much thought about it. I think of my upbringing is, my family is bringing me up to be a Japanese, but of course I was being very influenced by um, going to the white school, and therefore, um, I used to be a fluent Japanese speaker as a little kid, but I've lost all that stuff. Anyway, so it was quite a shock to be removed and put on trains and going out into the middle of the Arizona desert, um, just simply because we happen to be, or I happen to be of Japanese descent. My father was an alien born in Japan. My mother was a Kibe Nisei, as we call it. She was born in the US, but educated in Japan. And therefore, Japanese was the spoken language at home. And as a farm kid, no, I was not sophisticated about world politics or what was going on. And so uh, it, the war began, and it was, you know, um, nothing terrible happened to us even when the war began. Uh, but then the orders came down that we had to move. And I think I was lucky in having calm parents who didn't panic over this. And so as long as our family was together, um, I didn't have any feeling of danger or anything. Now, every family had a different story, and there were many families where the father, the breadwinner, the husband, was picked up by the FBI around Pearl Harbor Day or afterwards, and these people were considered perhaps, possibly dangerous aliens, and so they went into Department of Justice camps, and so there were families left, without the father around, and the poor women had to deal with um, all of the workload of continuing the family business and taking care of clearing up all their loose ends to move to camp and everything. And so I would say that family by family, we all had different experiences, and some were a lot worse than others. We went straight to Poston, which is a camp in Arizona near the Colorado River, and the nearest town was called Parker. And apparently there were three camps, and it was Poston 1, Poston 2, Poston 3. But I, in Poston 1, was not aware of the other camps because there was maybe like 5 miles between them. So all this, what I know about camp is stuff that I've learned, after camp, because we were pretty isolated and cut off from the outside world for quite a while. Um, so it was like we had to establish some kind of functioning society while we were there in the camps. Now, the Japanese culturally are pretty good at organizing, so immediately churches were, you know, um, what should I say? They used parts of barracks for churches and
Wow.
sports activity, all kinds of social activity was organized because we had so much uh, free time. Um, it was kind of a regimented life because here we were crammed in all these barracks, and we ate our meals 3 times a day in the mess hall. We didn't have to prepare it or anything, so um, especially for us children, because at the beginning there was nothing for us to do, more or less. So I just remember walking all over our camp because it was quite big. There was about 10,000 people there, and I think the shock for me was, wow, these all these people are um, Japanese and Japanese Americans. So it was a funny kind of culture shock. At any
Yeah.
rate, um, I have to say that my family was lucky in many ways. Like there were no sons in the family, so we didn't face the dilemma of the boys being drafted and put into the army. My
Mm,
father didn't get picked up, so we were an intact family the whole time. Uh, we didn't get moved from camp to camp, and this is true of many other families. So if I compare the experience with others, I would say that ours was relatively stable. And now I was in camp for 3.5 years. The whole family was.
mm,
And that's quite a long time when you think about it. And I was
yeah.
between the ages of 12 and 15. I had two younger sisters. And like I say, Japanese culture and all was pretty strong in my family. Well, sometime in the middle of this experience, our government decided to test us with a loyalty test, a questionnaire, and everyone over the age of 17 had to fill this out. So when our family faced that, well, I didn't because I was too young. I think my parents were very disillusioned with America, and they just felt that life here that we weren't wanted, and that it would be better if we went to Japan. So they signed
Oh.
repatriation papers to go to Japan. Now, I, as a rebellious 13-year-old, that I didn't want to go. So, we had a very big internal family fight over that. As it turned out, we didn't go. And also, we didn't get transferred to Tule Lake, the segregation center where all non loyal, so called disloyals, and, people who resisted and gave the camp administrators a lot of trouble, they got sent to Tule Lake. And that's where a whole lot of terrible things happened. And luckily,
Mhm.
my family was not sent there. We should have been because we had asked for repatriation, but we weren't. So I say we were lucky in many ways. And we didn't go to Japan, as it turned out, and stayed in this country. But uh, later on, after many years later, when I really
Mhm.
got interested in this whole subject, um, I learned so much about what happened to the community as a whole and to individuals. There were many uh, terrible stories of what happened to people. So I now look on it as kind of a community disaster that had happened to the whole West Coast Japanese American um, ethnic group. Um,
Mhm.
you know, now you you we don't. Well, we have a kind of conflict about calling it a concentration camp because of the association of that term with the Holocaust, and
Yeah.
so I understand that, and certainly they were not death camps like Buchenwald or one of those Nazi
Yeah.
concentration camps. However, in light of American democratic principles, it was a gross violation of the civil rights of our group and particularly of our 70% of the people in the camps were American citizens having been born here. So
Wow.
when you look at it from that angle, it was a kind of shocking thing that the government did, that solely on the basis of ethnic descent, and because we were at war with Japan, that
Yeah.
they gave the excuse of military necessity, that we were not trustworthy, we could be spies and saboteurs for all they knew, and they said they didn't have time to separate out, the suspicious people from the non-suspicious, so they just rounded us all up. And I mean all. They took children from orphanages, they took people out of hospitals, and some people died because they were sick. And it was just a blanket sweep up. And why they did that is still not totally known. We know that President Franklin Roosevelt signed the executive order that set it all into motion. And, well, I can't, quite put my head in their state. Like, why did they do this thing? I don't know. And I think maybe it was just a kind of hysteria, war hysteria, and a lot of politicians that use this issue as a way to proclaim their patriotism, and that they were protecting the West Coast from possible sabotage, etc. Anyway, and looking back on it now, it really was a life-changing, trauma for most of us. And I've spent a long time kind of studying all this, and trying to figure out just what effect it had on my personal life. So, emotional and psychological impact. Yeah, really. For a group of people who were so law-abiding and so industrious and so, what should I say, low profile, it was pretty devastating because we were made to feel like we weren't wanted, that we were, possible dangers to the country, and that so much so that they had to build all of these camps, and there were 10 major camps, and maybe over 100 smaller little places where people were held all over the United States. And we're not finished finding more little places where people were kept, from jails to, I don't know, all sorts of places. A friend of mine, Jeff Burton, says he thinks he has counted up to 139 little places where people were taken. So it was not a benign, just keeping us cooped up for 3.5 years. There was a lot of misery inflicted on the inmates during that time. So I think, but on the other hand, here was this world war going on, and I just remember feeling very isolated and cut off from the outside world. So, we kind of didn't quite know what was going on. So, yeah, it's just kind of a surreal time. And personally, I did not, like post internment challenges, post war challenges. Because of my age, I kind of just went back to school and picked up where I left off. But I look on this as a great tragedy for the immigrant generation, the so-called Issei, who came from Japan and were not allowed to become citizens, were not allowed to own land in certain states, and could not, lease land for longer than 3 years in California. And all of the barriers that were put up, against peoples of color, the standard American way, you might say. And so some people had a great deal of difficulty, and this is a proud people. They didn't want to go on welfare or that kind of thing, but they were desperate. When we left camp, everybody was given a ticket, whatever kind of ticket, bus or train or whatever, to go to wherever they wanted to, and $25, and that's what was given us to start our lives over. And when you think of everything that was lost by people, you know, some people just never recovered, particularly the older people. And that's, to me, the great tragedy, that the government did not help these people who were rendered destitute and, just thrown back out into society. A lot of them were afraid that, because of the war, that people would hate Japanese. And of course, a lot of people did. And so it was very hard for many people to reestablish. Yeah, for myself, I was still in high school, so I went to high school and then I went to college, and my life kind of resumed a normalcy, you might say. Anyway, um, well, I guess I could go on and on about this, but let's get on to other things. Yeah.
Well, I do want to ask about, kind of a lot of the terminology surrounding uh, the concentration camps, surrounding this period of time, this wrongful kind of holding. Uh, do you think that a lot of the, reframing of what it was, making it not seem as bad as it was, calling it an internment camp when it really wasn't? Why do
Hmm.
you think? Why do you think that information was really pushed?
Well, of course, I think, in their heart of hearts, I'm sure the government officials kind of knew that this is wrong. And so they wanted to put as benign a face on it as they could. And, like there were attempts at, let's say, democratic rule inside the camps, allowing people to elect town councils and all, that kind of
Mhm.
thing. But, when it comes right down to it, we were prisoners in jail. Um, and to call it relocation camp implies that, that was just a stopping point where then people would be, quote unquote, relocated to other parts of the country. See, the whole entire West Coast was, we were not allowed into these so called military zones. But no programs were put into place to immediately, facilitate people moving out of the camps and out into other areas of the country. And so you know, I think that the fact that they did this thing labeled us as somehow dangerous, and many communities just said, "Don't ever send any to us." If they're too dangerous for California and Washington and Oregon and Alaska, then don't send them to us. So anyway, so it just, if there was policy, it certainly wasn't to help us. Um, in
Mhm.
fact, it was more to keep us incarcerated all that time.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
How did this incarceration, this the concentration affect you in what you wanted to do, going through your more formative years in
Hmm.
these camps? How did that affect your mindset on what you wanted to do as an
Hmm.
adult?
Well, I went to college. Well, I went to UCLA for a year, and then I transferred to Berkeley. And Berkeley was quite a place in those days.
Hmm.
That was the time of McCarthyism, when there was the big Red Scare, and a lot of people were hurt by uh, that whole anti-liberal movement that was going on. And
Hmm.
of course, Berkeley campus is a very political place, and so there was a lot of agitation about a loyalty oath that professors had to submit to. And uh,
Oh, wow.
anyway, so I got, into student groups like the Student Civil Liberties Union. I guess so. We were kind of patterned after the ACLU, and we were fighting McCarthyism, and there was all kinds of political splinter groups and stuff. And man, it was really wild on Berkeley campus, and it was great fun. Really, you just learned a lot by just hanging out with
Mm-hmm.
all shades of radicals and liberals and
Yeah.
progressives and all that stuff. So that's how I got into civil rights and social justice causes, is because of my experience at Berkeley. And I met and married my husband there, and we were both at that time socialists together. And
Mm-hmm.
I do remember marching um, with placards and everything, with signs saying, "Get the French out of Indochina." Now, I wasn't
Mm.
so politically sophisticated as to know exactly what that meant, but that's the kind of campus I was on, where we did that kind of thing. Um,
Yeah.
so you know that was when the French had control of Vietnam way back then. Anyway, but one of the great things is you get a terrific education because you rub shoulders with all these very articulate political types, among the students. So, um, anyway, and then the civil rights era of the '60s, I got all of us did, got involved in that. And then we were anti-Vietnam War. We did a
Mm-hmm.
lot of that kind of stuff. And I think feminism was rising at that point. And uh, as you can imagine, Berkeley was sex and drugs and rock and roll too. All that stuff
Yeah.
was going on. So, man, it was very active. I mean, you could join just about any kind of splinter organization, for your whatever you're deeply interested in. So, um, and then you always meet lots of interesting people when you join these organizations, or attach yourself to them. So, in that way, you meet a lot of smart people, and really talking about politics and society and civil rights and racism and women's rights and all that stuff. Anyway, um, and then I realized later that Berkeley was kind of a special situation, that, you know, there weren't things like this going on all over the United States. So we were kind of an island in a lot of ways. I was lucky, to be here at the time. Um, now, um, with the rise of the Black civil rights movements during the '60s and all, there was rising consciousness, sensitivity towards racism. I mean, about racism towards other peoples of color, and I would say, Native Americans and Mexican, or people from south of the border, and also among the Asian Americans, that racism was kind of part of American culture. That there's a long history of discrimination against peoples of color, and that all of our groups had suffered in some way from assorted, uh, you know, say laws that were passed to keep us from, like becoming citizens, or um, also, voting, and in every arena. When you get, I hate to use this cliched term, but woke, when you begin to understand this kind of thing and you see it, you start
Yeah.
seeing it where you didn't before, then you know, you begin to observe the flaws in our country of, um, you know, how people have been treated um, over, even from the very beginning of the establishment of this country. So I think that for many of us, we would like to make a more just society. We would like to be the first nation in the world, you might say, where um, peoples of different religions, ethnicity, color, whatever you want to call it, um, you know, are given equality and justice and, a fair chance at establishing decent lives and all that. So I think that's really the motivating feature for many civil rights activists, and it certainly is for me. Um, I am particularly uh, disturbed by the history of Black people in this country, because I have to be honest and say Asian Americans, um, well, we came here later than most everybody else, so we haven't had quite that kind of experience. And because our
Definitely.
numbers were small, although they're not small anymore, I guess,
Mm,
anyway, we just did not suffer the same kind of just blatant racism.
mm,
Um, so, also, I think, the people who came from Asia were highly motivated to succeed, to establish themselves. And so I come from a culture that values education a lot. So that's a given, within the families. So we go to college and uh, become good citizens and, get decent jobs and all that kind of stuff. And it must look to other people's that we're honorary whites, that we're pretty much accepted in white culture and white
mm.
society. Um, and yes and no, you know, uh, this is true, but I think, just like during COVID, when they started calling COVID, the Chinese virus or
Yeah.
anyway, with all that implication. And so we got, and all Asians look alike, I guess. Anyway, so we get picked
Hmm.
on, as being responsible for COVID. I mean, that's outrageous, but
Yeah.
nevertheless, uh, our country, they like to have scapegoats or somebody to blame or explain what happened and all that. So, you know, we're not that immune from, uh, should I say, government.
Yeah. Hmm.
you know, even though, like, say, my family came before the turn of the century, before 1900, so we've been here a long time, relatively, but still, um, I might be looked upon as a foreigner by
Hmm.
many people. The Bay Area is different. Bay Area is full of all kinds of people, and so this kind of thing doesn't come up so much. But if I travel, um, east of here, I look around and there's almost no Asian Americans
Hmm.
in great parts of this country. And, um, I remember once going to the University of Wisconsin where I was giving a talk on my movie, Rabbit in the Moon. And the students said, "How does it feel to be the only non white in this classroom?" And I looked around, and sure enough, I was the only non white person. It hadn't
Wow.
occurred to me to look at it that way, And I said, well, it doesn't really feel so different.
That's like an interesting
Uh,
question to
I,
ask.
yes, I am obviously not white, but I'm an American, and my values are shared American values. And so I don't feel out of place here at all, and I'm educated and all that stuff. So um, uh, anyway, um,
Hmm.
I don't even remember what I answered because I was sort of taken aback. And
Yeah.
so, but then that has stuck in my mind because I need to be aware of this kind of thing, uh, wherever I go. I don't like to think of it in those terms because I like to feel like, well, we're all Americans and
Yeah.
we're not so different from one another,
Hmm.
really. But now that I know so much about the history of racism, I see things, a little differently and a little bit more critically, I think. So I can't say that Asian Americans have been so accepted in American society and culture. Besides, there's a lot of immigrants who keep coming, and they will have to go through a lot of this sort of thing of being thought of as outsiders. Um, okay, in my case, I married white, so my children are mixed race, and um, actually, I guess that's so common on the West Coast that
Yeah.
nobody really thinks about it, um, but um, not true for a lot of people. I understand that.
Yeah. I think I do want to ask in Berkeley, where you said that you had a lot of your kind of involvement in the civil rights movements.
Hmm.
Were you ever during like the time of McCarthyism, were you ever like suppressed like in your political opinions and like protests, or was it a more free thinking environment?
Um, Berkeley is a unique place. Well, maybe not so. I don't know. Maybe Boston, with Harvard and all those places, uh, maybe they're more like here. But I don't remember that. You know, as students, we certainly did a lot of marching and a lot of
Yeah.
protesting, and Berkeley. I was not a student when Mario Savio and those people were shutting down the university and all that.
Mm,
But then I was living here, so I certainly saw it all, and I was cheering for the students, of course.
yeah.
Um, anyway, it just seemed to me, because there was so much of that going on. I just sort of thought that this is kind of the natural state of affairs. If you don't like something, you can protest, you can say something about it and all that. And, you know, didn't expect to get punished.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
anyway, no, I was raising children and things by that point. So I was in the, parent of small children uh, mode of life. Taking them to nursery school and all that kind of thing. So I mean, all these middle class kinds of um, what should I say things that take over your life when you start a family and all. So
Yeah.
it became more conservative on account of uh, having a family. So although we we all talked a lot about politics and stuff, and we weren't quite so active.
Hmm. Yeah.
um, But now that I look back on it, it seems like there's always something to be mad about or to be upset about. So in our
Yeah.
country, I mean, the Vietnam War went on a long time, and it practically tore the country apart for a little while, um, and then of course. Um, I would be active in political campaigns. I feel like our system is kind of skewed. Everybody knows, like the Electoral College or the Senate that allows two senators per state, no matter what the population is, and all those things certainly favor conservatism, you might say. We are not by any means a perfect nation, so there are a lot of things that anybody can work on to make things more equal and more just. Um, I mean, those are such broad concepts, but
Yeah.
I live in Oakland, and Oakland, is kind of a troubled city in many ways. Anyway, um, you
Mhm.
know, I just feel that there's lots any one person, can get involved in and do if they wanted to. I'm 93 now, so I'm really slowed down. And I think COVID had a terrible effect on the whole
Yeah.
country in kind of closing everything down for a couple of years. And I don't think that it's going to be the same. So far, of course, it hasn't been, but I am now more worried about the direction our country is headed in. So, um, I, yeah, I am worried about our country.
Yeah.
Anyway, to go on with all these other things, you asked about Rabbit in the Moon. Now, um, when the redress movement, now redress was a movement among Japanese Americans to ask for an apology from the government for what they did to us, and also for some compensation or redress for the experience. And it started in the late 70s. Uh, I think that a lot of the motivation came from the Black movement in the 60s and 70s. And um, ah, turn my phone off
No, don't
just
worry
for a
about it.
minute. Sorry about that. I forget about all this technology we have here. Anyway, um, where was I? Oh, yeah. Yellow power movement, on college campuses and things like that. And so the Asian American voices were being raised, and also, examination of our history also. And so I got into that because I realized, what had been done to us was pretty unconstitutional and against the Bill of Rights and all that. So I started working on that, and I was extremely lucky in that um, there were several different movements going on. One was through the congressional path of, passing a bill and getting it signed by the president and all that for these things that we've asked for. And then there was another one which worked to overturning the three important cases that went up to the Supreme Court during the war. One was Hirabayashi, another was Korematsu, and another was Yasui. And so a bunch of lawyers worked to overturn those cases. And then my friend William Horry started a movement of legal redress. So he started a class action suit called Horry versus the United States, and it was drawn up, by lawyers and all of the violations of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and all that. Like I know something like 11 different violations, and uh, we started in on putting this up through the legal system, and it went up from step to step, and we got up to the Supreme Court. And I had the privilege of going to sit in front of the Supreme Court while our case was being debated. And because of that, being named a plaintiff in the class action, there's a certain number of names that they have to represent the class. I happen to be one of them. Um, I got to know a lot of scholars, lawyers, activists, and such who were involved in all three of these efforts. And Aiko Herzig and her husband Jack Herzig and William Horry and a great lawyer historian named Peter Irons uh, were all very active in these efforts. And they just opened my eyes to the whole history uh, and, you know, just learning about what actually happened. And after redress was passed, our lawsuit got up to the Supreme Court, but then was declared moot. So that was the end of that. But the redress bills that were introduced in Congress finally resulted in a victory in 1988, and we got letters of apology from the president and $20,000 a token uh, redress recompense for all that we had lost. Now, these are symbolic victories, you might say, and the lawsuit had asked for a lot more damages. Um, so that's probably why it was declared moot, because they didn't want
Yeah.
to pay that much money. Nevertheless, um, the fact that this really tiny little group of Japanese Americans, that we dared to sue the
Mm-hmm.
government and all, and that, you know, I thought that this was going to be an educational process, that this will be a way to um, inform the public about our history, and that for that reason it was worth doing, because um, otherwise this our history will just fade away, and will hardly be um, part of American history,
Yeah.
more or less, because they'll just kind of write it out. Um, so, but the fact that we did triumph um, in that time and place, 1988, that was a victory for democracy. And we were just exhilarated, because it seemed like such a long shot. And then also in the lawsuits, too, they did manage to vacate, I think, Korematsu and Hirabayashi. I don't know. I think Min Yasui died before his case was completed, so I don't know what happened to that. But anyway, I think that what it did for our community was really give us a big shot in the arm that, hey, we didn't, we probably could have uh, done this earlier, because so many people, were dying off, our parental generation, and they didn't get to receive the apology or the money. But better late than never, and it was educational because, well, for instance, I learned a lot, but then it it was pretty obvious that the vast country still knew hardly, didn't know about it. And I've had people say, "Oh, that's unbelievable. Our country didn't do that, or wouldn't do that, or something like that." And so I just felt like, well, we've got to educate the general public somehow. And I could write a book, but how many people would read it? It would also take me years and years. So my sister, who was a filmmaker, um, she was not so active in any of all this stuff. So she didn't know that much, about the history and all the internal stuff that went in with the redress movement. So I said to her, there should be a documentary made about this history. And so we didn't think that we had the chops to do that kind of thing. So we started asking around, and, like, would anybody like to do this? Would anybody help us? And we got almost no interest from
Yeah.
others. And so we said, well, I guess we'll have to do it ourselves, which is, when I look back on it, I was what, like 60 years old
Mm-hmm.
then, and my sister was 50. And anyway, so we just started writing grant proposals and stuff. And, you know, it took us about 9 years to complete the film. Um, this was, I mean, it's a long time, but on the other hand, it gave us time to really think about it, to talk to a lot of people and do research and all that. And so, in a way, it really uh, gave gave a lot more depth to our documentary because we learned so much, and that we made it a really serious documentary. So, well, the motivation behind the film was to educate the public, and fortunately, our documentary has been doing
Yeah.
that. It came out in 1999, and it's still around, going to classrooms and being shown, and it's available through Canopy at the library. So um, it's still doing its job, and we're really pleased because, um, well, it's
Yeah.
our bit towards the cause of enlightening the public about aspects of our history, our American history, that needs to be known. In fact, when you think about it, our incarceration set a dangerous precedent. I mean, the government went to the trouble of building all these camps. And if you see pictures of the camps, they look like concentration camps,
Yeah.
these tar paper covered barracks and all out in desolate, really remote places. And that the fact that, took a lot of planning, a lot of money, and um, manpower and everything to build these places, to put us in these places, to keep us going. I mean, they had to pay for our pay for all of
Yeah.
us, um, and just like, well, why was this
Yeah.
done? Why was it done? You have to ask that question of American historians and such. So, um, and having set that precedent, it could happen to other people too. Almost did with after 9/11 with Muslim Americans, or people who are considered,
Yeah.
uh, I don't know, Middle Eastern. That's a huge category of people, but I understand that they really did pick up and deport a bunch of
Yeah.
people or what, but there was no mass roundup. Uh, I think our Japanese Americans jumped up and said, "Don't let this happen,"
Yeah.
again. So we like to at least add our voices to, um, because we're we've experienced it. I have experienced it, so I feel I have the moral authority to say, you guys, we have to be on our toes about these um, government policies because it could happen again very easily.
Yeah.
We
Yeah,
know that.
definitely. Do you think that it's the responsibility of people of color to kind of fight for each other's rights?
Yes, yeah. I mean, that's my kind of ultimate goal, is coalitions of, and I just say peoples of color,
Yeah.
because that, I hope, includes everybody who's under,
Yeah.
under these circumstances, that we would form coalitions, and and politics is the way to go. We need to have, people who have power over policy and such, that it's very important that we make try to attempt to make sure that we're given equal treatment. Um, and I guess there must be white supremacists who think that we're grabbing too much, that we're being coddled, and oh, well, look at the whole immigration mess, that we're being given special privileges or something like that. And that's not true. We're not asking for that kind of thing. We're just asking for equality and justice, and uh, a fair chance of uh, establishing decent lives. That's all. And but then apparently that's a lot. So
For them.
um, anyway, yeah. And I understand that white America is worried that this country will become more colored, you might say,
More
and
diverse.
pretty quickly, in the next couple of decades. Um, yeah, but then uh, they were immigrants pretty much
Yeah.
before,
Invaders.
and so you know, I think people came here and still want to come here because they think that they're going to have the freedom to make a living and live in kind of a decent society. And so I think people who come as immigrants um, are people who um, realize that maybe they could have freer lives, or um, can have more control over their lives and such, and that's why they come. Um, so I know it's difficult, and there's quota systems and all that, but I don't know. We need immigrants. Let's put it
Yeah.
that way. We need the labor force, and it's so stupid for them to demonize immigrants, because most immigrants are kind of young, and they will contribute to the labor force and to the economy for years, um, and we need that to offset the fact that we're also an aging population, and so
Yeah.
it it just doesn't make sense that people are so anti-immigrant.
Hmm.
Well, let's
And
see.
I also,
Yes, I am continuing efforts to educate about incarceration. Yeah, because how many people really know about it?
mhm.
Because I'm living on the West Coast, and I figure in California and Oregon and Washington, I think they have to teach this in the schools and all. And I get requests to address student groups, college or high school and all. And so I I go out to talk to these kids, and it's hard to have them imagine. Can you imagine, being born in 1930 and what life was like way back then? That, like my family, I don't even know if we had a radio, but you know, life was very different back then. And so I guess something like minority problems and stuff, unless you happen to be of a minority group, probably doesn't, you don't think about it very much. Uh, and also, I certainly hope that the younger generations, that it just doesn't matter so much uh, what anybody's skin color is or hair texture is or whatever. Anyway, in fact, when I look at blacks and their various hairdos and uh, all the things that they can do with their hair compared to the rest of us who have kind of the straight hair, um, it's almost like, gee, you guys, you can, you have very
Yeah.
interesting hair. It's great. I like to watch the basketball teams because the hairdos are so really sometimes weird, and I just feel I'm happy that they now have the freedom to just do it, and uh, I think it just adds a lot of richness to our society. And I think that, we are ahead of most countries in terms um, of a diverse population, and we should celebrate that. Um, and we have huge problems before us, like climate change and all that. So I think we should just get over some of this nitpicky kind of problems that we create for ourselves, and address the big problems.
No,
Uh,
definitely. I agree.
anyway, um, yeah, I went through periods of not liking my group of and like being a political activist. I just felt like the Japanese American community is so conservative
Mm.
and so um, uh, uninterested in
Oh,
politics or other minority groups and stuff like that. And so I just felt like, oh man, I don't identify with them.
wow.
Uh, but then over the years, I really have come to understand and recognize that our community had gone through a really terrible traumatic experience. And therefore, you know, I think that we were scared and cowed and made to feel, very vulnerable. And so we, uh, you know, we had to keep a low profile and not speak out and not make waves or anything, because look what they can do to us. They can round you up. Um, so I understand that now. So I am much more sympathetic, and the effects of that kind of thing really comes down through the generations, and like so many families will say things like, well, my grandparents never talked about it, or my parents, they just will not respond, when I ask
Mm.
about it and all. And so uh, because of that suppressed um, knowledge and emotion and all that, it is kind of sort of unconsciously transferred to children. Um, but that's slowly, I mean, that's dissipating too. I think that people are much freer, feel freer to talk about it, and to get mad at the government, and uh, feel indignant about what they did to us, and um, that all this is healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I hope they come around to understanding that we're not the only ones. Gee, lots of people in this country have been treated very badly. So uh, you know I just hope that we learn from our experiences, although sometimes I wonder about that. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
um, anyway, um, so my mission now is to keep educating and informing um, people about our history, but also how our history just fits into the history of racism in the United States. Um, I'm do I'm asked questions such as, "Do you love America?" And I don't want to use the term of it. I love America. What does that
Mm-hmm.
mean? I am devoted to her um, ideals. I am. I understand that this is quite a magnificent
Yeah.
economy. That we the freedom means that we attract brains to this country, and so so much innovation takes place in the United States. I am still an American, and I wouldn't live anywhere else. And I feel that I have the freedom to speak out and criticize and, uh, you know, uh, do what I can to change things. And anyway, I'm just a Berkeley radical, as I say. um, um, but
Yeah.
gives me lots to do in my old
Yeah,
age, So it's a good thing for me.
that's good.
Yeah. Getting mad about things, gets the juices flowing like, oh, why did they
Yeah.
do that? Or why do they think that? Or why are they? I mean, there's lots to be indignant about today, you
Hmm.
realize. I mean, I realize
No, yeah.
anyway. And so, well,
Yeah.
I guess there's still hope for the United
Yeah.
States, okay?
There definitely is. Especially if people still fight for
And
rights.
yeah, I just, well, when I get really down, I then I think of, all the things that I've done and all the things that have happened and all the friends that I have and everything. And, there's something else to get mad
Mhm.
about. So, um, anyway,
Yeah.
I think it's healthy to um, not just accept everything. Oh, I have to show you my
Yeah.
t-shirts. T-shirt. It says, no more shikata ga nai,
Hmm.
okay? And it says Frank Emmy
Yeah.
down here. Okay. Shikataganai is a Japanese phrase, and it means, um, well, it can't be helped.
Uh,
You have to accept things as they are because nothing can be done about it. And they used to say about having been put into the camps, well,
mm,
shikataganai, there was nothing that could be done about it, so we just have to suck it up and accept it and all that.
yeah.
But Frank, Frank Emmy is a special person. He was a he was in the camp Minidoka, which is in Wyoming or
Hmm.
Idaho. No, he was in Heart Mountain, which is in Idaho. No, it's in, oh God. Anyway, Minidoka. No, Heart Mountain. And you know the US government had the nerve to draft boys out of the camps to serve in the army. Um, First, they formed a all volunteer corps, and they got lots of volunteers from Hawaii. Now, there's a
Hmm.
story. They did not remove all the Japanese Americans in Hawaii and put them into
Oh.
camps. And there's a lot of different reasons for that, but they had like maybe 40% of the population in Hawaii, and Pearl Harbor is in
Hmm.
Hawaii. And so, that was a war zone, but they didn't do that. And they did round up community leaders. They banned, the Buddhist church and
Mm.
did some things like that. And the islands were under martial law. Um, but when the call went out for volunteers for an all Nisei, as they say, Japanese
Uh-huh.
Americans, um, to volunteer for the Army, they got lots and lots of volunteers from Hawaii and not very many from the camps, as you can
Yes.
imagine. So, and they put them into a segregated unit.
Mm.
So, there they were, um, being trained and shipped overseas as one Nisei all Japanese American unit, and that seems very anti-democratic again. But anyway, they are a celebrated part of our story because they performed so heroically in Europe,
Mm.
and then there were people who were because of language skills that they spoke Japanese. That there were men who served in the Pacific Theater because they were valuable there,
Hmm.
and so these people are regarded as the true heroes of our incarcerated people.
Yeah.
But when their ranks got really depleted, they decided that they needed to draft the boys because for replacements, and that set up a huge
Mm.
um, uproar in the camps, because why should they serve, while their families were being kept in concentration camps? So um, there was, uproar about this situation, and a number of men did not show up for their, I think it's a health examination or something. That's the first step in, getting drafted. And so these people were called the draft resistors, and Frank Emmy was a leader among them. And Frank was a man of principle. He was really, like, he had a family and he was a little old, and so he probably wouldn't have gotten drafted, but as a matter of principle, he opposed it. So they had a group that had a trial, in an outside court, and were all sentenced to prison. And uh, these people were made pariahs in our communities, like they were draft dodgers, and you know they didn't want to go for assorted personal reasons and whatnot. And so uh, after the war, they were vilified, and treated badly by our community. Um, so Frank Emmy, who just was very steadfast, he was very proud. He's a martial arts expert, and so he never gave in. And so only in the 70s and 80s did their story, begin to circulate, and now they're considered equally heroic for standing up for civil rights and, suffering the consequences of that. Um, and there's lots and lots of stories of people who did rather heroic
Yeah.
things. And I could go into a long story about the people considered disloyal and were deported to Japan. And
Yeah.
anyway, like I say, our family did not, go through a whole lot of um, hardship, just by accident, you might say, but others did. And it really tore families apart. So um, I feel that we need to, pay attention to what's happening to peoples of color in this world, in this nation. And I don't know, you could look out on the whole thing worldwide. How, well, look at the immigration problems in Europe. How they have problems because of all these people who are fleeing war and uh, you know famine and everything, and pouring into Europe and going on these refugee ships and all that. And um, they're having trouble uh, integrating these people into their societies. So it's a worldwide problem. And um, I I don't know how we're going to resolve all this. I think maybe if we had a threat from outer space, maybe then we'd organize
Come
to
together
protect
against.
ourselves. But other than that, I can't see people, assimilating smoothly
Yeah.
all over the U.S., all over the country, the world. Anyway, so race is this kind of false construct. They keep telling us that we're all pretty much the same, except for a few genes, I
Yeah.
guess. And so, yeah, um, but it's so persistent. I'm like really shocked that anti-Semitism has come back in such a
Yeah. Very
such a
large wave.
big way in the United States. That just shocks me, because I keep saying, well, Jews are white
Yeah.
folks, what is the problem here? But this is a situation that's persisted over the centuries, and why it continues. I don't know. So, you know, um, the other, you can name any group the other, I guess, and not want to deal with them or have them come and live in your community and all that. I used to say things like, well, in this country, you know, uh, we have many different ethnic groups and religions and everything, but at least we don't kill each other. But then that's not so true
Yeah,
anymore. We
we
are
are.
killing each other. Dad, so um,
Hmm.
so we've still got a long way to go, to make this a functioning democracy.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, no,
um,
definitely. I wanna
yeah.
ask one kind of final general question, like a large question. And it kind of relates to what you're wearing on your shirt. But how do we
Mhm.
kind of move past this like conformity with what happened and like move past just accepting the history that's been told to us about how it wasn't, you know, the incarceration, the concentration wasn't as bad as it was, or that people of color really aren't oppressed? How do we move past these like propaganda and, fight for each other's rights and create solidarity?
Mhm. Well, I think maybe the very basic thing is that more people live with a few people, from other racial or ethnic groups and stuff. I think when you get to know somebody, then, he doesn't seem nearly as uh, threatening or strange or
Different.
different or whatever. And so I would like to see the schools much more integrated, and that's where we can really make a difference. Give every school kid an equal education so that they all get, started off on the right
Hmm.
foot.
Yeah.
We could do a lot to integrate schools more. And so if people could live, um, you know, with each other. Like I live in a condominium, and it's not a very big one. There's only 26 units, but it's a very mixed group that lives in this condominium. There are black people and Asians and uh, well, all kinds
Yeah.
of people. Anyway, so we're neighbors, and we're not that we interfere in each other's lives or anything, but we certainly are friendly when we see each other and all. And you know, there was an Indian couple who were living downstairs, but I think they've moved out now. But anyway, the point just being that you see these people and they're your neighbors, and just accept them. Uh, that's getting to know others is maybe the only way to kind of change your attitudes or make them feel less uh, intimidating or uh, different or you know can't be trusted or whatever, that kind of thing. uh, and you see a lot of it. I mean, in the Bay Area, I'm not saying that we better than everybody else in the country, but this is a very mixed um, community, the whole Bay Area. And I just feel that eventually the Bay Area, is going to be pretty mellow about all this, just simply because our kids go to school with at least I hope that they're all getting to know each other and uh, accepting of
Yeah.
others.
Yeah.
And we like to teach our kids that kind of thing, but it has to happen really like in classes and social groups and things like that.
No, yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. I don't know what all this is going to sound like to, I don't know who this podcast will
Yeah.
go out to, uh, but uh, um, I can't speak for the whole Japanese American community, because I know that I have been kind of different from most of them, and that I, for a long time, I lived outside of our the Japanese American community in a white community, more or less, and so I've just had a very different experience from many of them, uh, but um, so I've always been left wing and
Mm-hmm.
liberal, so and very outspoken about it. So I'm not the average Japanese American, but um, I think I still, speak for a large group of us, and that um, we, I hope, are learning through thinking about our experience, and how it impacted our lives and ourselves, so that they can feel more empathy for others who, have undergone other racial discriminatory um, practices, and that they understand that this is wrong, and um, we should try to work towards more
Yeah.
humanity. Let's just put it
Yeah.
that way, because well, I mean, it's kind of like a worldwide issue, and it's been, I guess, humanity's history that we've, fought wars and kind of wiped out other peoples, and go and grab people's
Yeah.
lands and things like that. That's been the human way of doing things, but we need to progress, and
Yes.
um, not we don't have to be like that. Certainly, live in peace.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
goodness.
Definitely.
Um,
We should.
I'm talking in cliches, but I really think I have to bring it down to the personal level. And I think we just need to get out of our comfort zones and make an effort to meet others, to work together for particular issues, and help our children grow up, not prejudiced, and certainly elect politicians that are also working, you know, for democratic principles and things. So anyway, there's a lot we can do.
Yeah. No. Most definitely. That starts with learning.
uh, yeah, and it doesn't. Life isn't totally grim. I mean, so actually, it's social contacts which make life, interesting, worth living, and fun, like parties, or being in a club, or being in a group that's doing something like uh, knocking on doors for a candidate, or
Hmm.
or marching in a protest
Yeah.
march, and that kind of thing. Um, it I think it's good for your mental
Oh
health,
yeah. Most
really.
definitely.
Anyway,
Well.
I have never been jailed, and I don't know why, but
Hmm.
I and like, is that on my bucket list? Well, there's still time, I guess.
Right.
Anyway, um, oh, except for the camp
Oh
experience, that
yeah.
was a jail. Yeah, yeah. So I have experienced something like that.
Some
Yeah,
form of incarceration, unjust incarceration.
yeah. Anyway,
Most definitely. Yeah.
like, look at Jane Fonda. How many times has she been jailed? I don't know,
Yeah.
lots. And of course, they would never touch her, I'm sure, but on principle, she gets jailed periodically, and
Yeah.
good for her.
Yeah. Well, Let's hope. I think that all of the work that you've done, especially like the work that you've done both to raise awareness for the about the incarceration and you know the Yellow Power for Black Lives movement is very moving.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's very powerful, and I think that everyone should be part of these movements, especially people of color. I think that it's important that we fight for each other's rights.
Yes, yeah. And like, black reparations, it's possible. I used to think, wow, how would we decide, what's fair or who gets the compensation or whatever we decide to do. But I think more and more, that it's doable and that uh, it would make a big difference in this country in many, many
Yeah.
ways to acknowledge the shameful history. It would give some people who are really down and out, a leg up perhaps, and a lot of good things can come from it. So I think it's important. At least we should discuss it
Yes,
thoroughly.
definitely. That's definitely an important step. I think that past that, those are all of the questions I have. Do you have any, final thoughts?
Well, I hope that I've raised some issues to give people something to think about, and that racial issues in this country affect everybody. So even though you may feel that, well, we don't have that kind of problem here. I mean, I can imagine places in the middle of the country where they don't have a problem because they don't have any people of color there
Yes.
or something like that. Uh, but um, um, so, their consciousnesses should be raised a little bit about this, and it's being hollowed out anyway. The young people keep moving away, and I just hope that their children, if they move to the cities and such, uh, will be changed by the fact that they'll be living in much more mixed societies. Um, yeah, I don't know what we're going to do with all of middle America, and people are going to jump on me for this. But wow, when you get to people like the MAGA group and stuff, how do you get through to them? I don't know. So anyway.
Well, it's all things we have to work for to get progress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But yeah. Well, I do really want to thank you for joining me, talking to me about all of these really important topics.
Oh, I just want to
Yeah,
mention
yeah,
one thing.
definitely.
Yeah, Rabbit in the Moon is part of Canopy. This is something that the libraries all have, so you can get it for free from the
Yeah,
library or local library, or you should be able to.
no,
Anyway,
definitely.
I think it's worth watching because it touches on a lot of things that I haven't been able to, talk about here.
Yes.
So, um,
yes. If you
thanks.
are listening to this podcast, then I would say definitely look at Rabbit in the Moon. Look at more of Chizu's work and support the Yellow Power for Black Lives Matter movement. Is there anything else that you want to kind of say, like some movement that you're working on right now?
Working on
Any
right now.
organization?
Yeah, I'm a writer kind of, and I've had a newspaper column for a long time, 30 years or so. So I'm thinking about some pieces to write about, and the issue that I'm thinking about now is like the clash of generations, the immigrant group and their American-born children, and this is kind of like a immigrant story in the United States where while the children are getting Americanized and the parents have a hard time dealing with that sometimes, that for my group being put into the camps really highlighted that particular issue, and I think that it's a real tragedy that it had to work out the way it did. So um, that's what I'm thinking about. I'm going to write
Awesome.
about that.
Yeah, that sounds great. Cool. Perfect. Do you have any social media or anything like that?
No, very old fashioned. I do no, I don't do Facebook. I do email,
Yes.
but not much beyond
Yeah.
that. Yeah. Sorry, I'm a techno klutz,
No, it's definitely a lot.
and I resist learning how to do all these newfangled things, and I'm just anachronism from the last century. So anyway,
No.
I'm just not going to bother to learn a lot of this stuff. Okay.
No, I totally understand. Social media is definitely a lot. Even for someone who grew up with it, it's definitely a lot to manage. But yeah, no. Definitely find Chizu through a lot of her work with these organizations. And thank you for listening. Goodbye.